oh, I never expected this. It was more like, yeah, this is who you should always, this is who you always were, and this is who I always thought you were. So it was more like, yeah, you were in your right place.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Live Through That, the companion podcast to my book of the same name, where I look at influential 90s musicians and where they are today. I'm Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we'll dig a little bit deeper into a pivotal moment into the lives of some of the artists I feature in my book. On this week's episode, we're talking to the charismatic frontman of the band Buffalo Tom, Bill Janovitz. In addition to his duties with Buffalo Tom, he's also the author of 2 books on the Rolling Stones, as well as an upcoming biography of Leon Russell. Today, he tells us about his beloved Uncle Vince and the effect he had on his life.
My mom and dad each had one sibling, which is weird because they're Irish Catholic and Italian Catholic. My mom's Italian. And it's weird. You'd think that New York Irish and Catholic families would have these huge, sprawling families, but they didn't. They each had one sibling, and their siblings were considerably younger, 4 or 6 years younger than 4 or 6 years younger than them. And in my mom's case, it was my uncle, and he was gay, and he it was sort of unaccepted by his parents. They didn't. He wasn't completely estranged, but he split as soon as he could. He joined the Navy during Vietnam, I think mostly so he wouldn't get drafted into the Army, and he left. He got a real taste and a love for Asia during that time. When he returned, he went to Haight-Ashbury at the height of the 60s. He talked about seeing Janis Joplin at a house party. He talked about, taking acid with this person or this. I mean, just incredible sort of stories. And then he went on to Hawaii, eventually got his master's, and came back to New York in the 80s, just before I moved to Massachusetts. And so I got to go into the city, which I was sort of doing by myself when I was like 13 or 14. Our parents would let us take the train on a weekend day, and we'd go to Manny's Music at 48th Street, look at the guitars, and so it was, which was kind of crazy because Times Square was insane back then, late 70s, early 80s. But my uncle moved down to the East Village, right around the corner from where the Fillmore East was. Had been, I should say. It was the Saint back then. So it was really cool. Like, here I have this cool gay uncle, and his boyfriend, who I didn't know was his boyfriend. I just thought it was his roommate, at the time. They were his boyfriend, who I'm friends with to this day. I'm going to see in about a month in Palm Springs. He's this incredible taste in music, and he encouraged my uncle to buy me these records for my 14th birthday: "Remain in Light" by Talking Heads, a Nina Hagen record, and a record by this band that nobody had heard of called U2, Boy. And I was just like, I was the envy of my friends. They're like, well, how do you know about this stuff? I'm like, well, my uncle and his boyfriend in New York brought me this stuff.
My first impression wasn't when I first met him, which was at his youngest brother's christening, which was in Long Island at an American Legion Hall in 1981.
That's Neil Hadeen, Vince's boyfriend at the time. He shares how he knew Bill would enjoy his record choices.
And he was 14 and I was 23. And he had a band already, and his band was playing at the christening at the, American Legion Hall for his new baby brother. And, when I heard what the plans were and the evening was, and that his 14-year-old nephew, his band was going to be playing, my expectations weren't very high, but I was really surprised at how good he was, at that age. And I was working at that time in New York for a messenger company, and we dealt with a lot of clients in music and entertainment industry. And so I had just told him, I said, if you have a demo that you will, I can help you get around to people, just let me know. That never came to anything, but I was just impressed right away with how technically proficient he was, even at 14. Well, I just moved to New York from Honolulu the previous year. Vince and I had moved from Honolulu to New York, and I was in Honolulu. I was very into the alternative music scene, but being Honolulu, nobody ever toured there. So the only people I ever got to see, I saw the Police play in 1979 in Hawaii, and they actually, since no one knew who they were, they played in the cafeteria at the University of Hawaii for about 200 people. So I was interested in, and I'd been a Talking Heads fan even in Hawaii, even though I'd never seen them live. And when I got to New York, that's when Remain in Light came out. And the first concert I went to when I moved to New York in 1980, I think it was October of 1980 or November 1980, was Talking Heads Remain in Light tour at Radio City. So that was my first concert in New York. So I was very excited about that band. I'd heard some Nina Hagen when I was in Hawaii. I worked in a discotheque in Hawaii, so I had access to a lot of music that wasn't otherwise out there. And then U2, that was their first album, had just come out, and which I thought was just phenomenal. So those are the three that I picked out.
So I would go visit them in the East Village. It was like 1979, 1980. Crazy great stuff. I mean, like, you want to talk about like the kid growing up 40 minutes outside of the city and always wanting to be in New York. I mean, and my uncle was always just this guy that was like, when I was 21, I'm jumping ahead now. So I would still come back and forth and visit him. But when I was 20, I should say, the summer of 86, before Buffalo Tom started, the summer before the fall that Buffalo Tom started, my uncle had me come down and work for him, this cushy job, $15 an hour, which back then was like insane amounts of money for a college kid, just doing data entry, which I couldn't even do adequately, in an office for Citicorp. And he was in the HR department there. And at the end of it, he's like, he brought me to this Indian restaurant on 6th Street or wherever the Indian restaurants are. There's a whole sort of block of them. And he said, he goes, I want to tell you something. And I said, yeah. He goes, don't ever work in an office. You suck at working in an office. You can't do this. This is not who you are. He said, what do you want? And I laughed. I said, thank you so much. And he's like, what do you want to do? And I had a great summer, by the way. I was living with two friends in a single room occupancy hotel. And then we moved down to their own apartment. They got their own apartment on 5th Street between 2nd and 3rd. Amazing time to be in New York. Had the summer of my life. And here's my uncle telling me, don't work in an office ever. He said, do what you want to do. What do you want to do? I said, I want to do music. He said, do music. He said, and I sort of choke up here because he's like, you'll always make money. Money will always come. He said, look at me. I've always wanted to design furniture. Here I am working in a fucking corporate office job. This is not me. He said, I'm going to stop this. You should stop this too. And he was only probably in his, I guess he was just around 40 or so. And he was making a huge life change. So, and then he asked me, are you going to get married? And I said, well, are you going to get married? He said, well, I'm a different case. And I said, I guess you're right. But out of that conversation, sort of that fall, I went back to school for Buffalo Tom and met my wife. Pretty incredible. But he and I were extremely close. And even when he became estranged from my mom during the George W. Bush years, when politics have really started to become divisive, we forget because Trump has reset the game. It's been insane. But he and my mom, he really sort of drew a line in the sand because my parents are conservative and he obviously was not. So, but we stayed in touch. Anyway, 2011, I get this call from his business partner. He had this furniture store in Miami. He had moved to Miami. He started designing furniture like he said he was going to. I hesitate because I get choked up. But I get this call from Vincent. Is my uncle's name was Vince Pravada, Vincent Pravada, but his business partner, was Vincent Tom, who's still a great friend of mine. And so Vincent Tom calls me and said, "Billy, I have some bad news." And I said, "What?" He goes, "Your uncle has been murdered." I mean, I don't know how I don't remember exactly what he said. I wrote it in the piece. And it just completely took it out of me. I mean, so what happened was, I still don't know to this day. The guy's in jail. He pleaded, and he's still in jail. But what happened was, my uncle, not just with me, but with my siblings and with other kids, was always sort of this mentor type personality. And he had a housekeeper whom he loved and who loved him. And she had a son who, I think, he was autistic. He definitely had some issues trying to adjust to schools. Vince was trying to help him in that regard. And this kid, his name was, I think it's James Arouse. He showed up, or didn't show up at one point. So I think my uncle was writing him this letter of recommendation for a job at like Toys R Us, something like that. And my uncle wrote him this letter and said, "Come and pick it up at this certain time." And the kid didn't come. And then he came late, or a different day. And my uncle was not a shrinking violet. My uncle was not somebody to avoid confrontation. He was probably a bit of a hothead, if truth be told. And I don't know what he told the kid, but it set the kid off. And the kid stabbed my uncle to death. And it was a brutal scene. And the kid claimed, knowing my uncle was gay, claimed that it was unwanted sexual advances, which is an incredible thing to have to deal with, So I'm trying to condense this a bit, but I got this call almost immediately, like the day after, maybe even the night of the murder, saying from a lawyer saying I was the executor. I'm the executor of my uncle's estate, which I had no idea. My uncle didn't ask me. I found it both an honor, but also a tremendous responsibility. So now I'm going down to Miami, and I go to Miami. I got two little kids at this point. Luckily, I have my wife who's completely takes care of the kids all the time. I'm just showing up and punching the clock from time to time. So I go down to Miami, and I stay in his house, which still has bloodstains on the gate. And I kind of wrote a song a bit about some of the images going through his stuff, and how devastating that was. Just to have to deal with what next, I had to meet with the detectives because when I came down to Miami, they still didn't know what had happened. I went into the detective's office. We went through theories. They're asking me what I knew, if there were, and my uncle had this renovation project. He had just designed and built this master bedroom suite addition to his cool, little, South Miami house. And it had just been finished. It's beautiful. I mean, just crazy timing. So there were questions about, well, maybe it was people that were coming in and out of the house, and we had no idea. But it didn't take long, because the kid was, not the brightest bulb, and took my uncle's credit cards and went to Wendy's. Oh, he went to Toys R Us. I don't know if he was going for a job. He went and bought like a Game Boy or something, some sort of video game thing. And it just took less than a week. They went to his house, and his mother answered the door, or maybe he answered the door, and he had cuts all over his hand, bandaged. So it was a very quick thing there. For me, I didn't feel a ton of animosity to the kid. I just felt like I was still dealing with, and I still don't, by the way. I never felt that sort of level of like, put him in the chair kind of thing. It was just more like, what a horrible thing to happen to both people. I mean, I was definitely angry, and I think my anger comes out more in the piece I wrote a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I don't know where else to go with that. I mean, my uncle meant so much to me, um, and you know, it brought me together with two of his dearest friends, three of his dearest friends, and the three of us, ranging from age like 70 something down to me being at that time I was probably 45 or so. Um, we went to Hawaii, my only time to Hawaii, and spread his ashes up off of Lanikai Beach. And we had an amazing time, the three of us, in a house that we rented for the better part of a week, just getting to know each other better and forming lifelong bonds there. So he brought us together there. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't into our music, but he was really, the fact that we would play CB's or the Pyramid or whatever in New York, I think was a, I think he got a real kick out of that. But I think it wasn't like, oh, I never expected this. It was more like, yeah, this is who you should always, this is who you always were, and this is who I always thought you were. So it was more like, yeah, you were in your right place. And he loved sharing music with me, and he did have great taste. I mean, he was the first person I think that played me Eva Cassidy and some other cool stuff, and I got some great CDs from his house. One of the last times I really hung out with him, he was in LA and I was in LA. He was in LA for some sort of manufacturing thing for his furniture. I think they were trying to, he had an importing exporting business too, of Asian antiquities and furnishings and stuff. So there was something to do with his business. He was out there, and my friend Mike O'Malley, the actor and showrunner, and he played. This is actually great. This dovetails with the conversation, and I think I think it was before Glee. Yeah, I think it was before Glee, but he played the supportive dad on Glee. When they met, they really hit it off. So Mike was out there, and I was out there for. I was out in LA to see this play that Mike had written that I scored, and we were in this little black box theater, and I brought my uncle. My uncle came, and my uncle just got. I think he got more a kick out of that than anything else. Like the fact that he was watching. That's like Brian Doyle Murray was this little play, and it was a real play, and his nephew had scored it, and he really bonded. I don't know. He really clicked with Mike. And I got to say this, Mike O'Malley was this guy that I got to know relatively late in life. In the late 90s, we met. Actually, my daughter was born already when we first met in 99. So right around that time, but we became really close friends really quickly. And I think Mike has that impact on a lot of people. But Mike just showed up in Miami. When my uncle died, when I was down there, he just came. Yeah, I mean, it just chokes me up because here's this guy with he's got a career. He's got two little like very young kids, and he just gets on a plane and comes, and it was just incredible,
Thank you to Bill and Neil for taking the time to share this story. And now on to a few recommendations from Bill.
Interestingly, I mean, this ties into Buffalo Tom a little bit. I went to the wake. Well, I shouldn't get into that. I'll just say I ran into our old manager, the Buffalo Tom's old manager, Tom Johnston, who was hugely influential for Buffalo Tom, of course, a pivotal presence, like sort of basically the fourth Buffalo Tom member. And he asked me if I had read this book, A Little Devil in America, Notes in Praise of Black Performance. Hanif Abdurraqib, I think is how he pronounces his name. I'm not sure. And I had not read it, so he just sent it to me. And that's kind of how, something like is just appealing to me, it goes right to the top of the pile. And I really do have a pile. I've been backed up totally in Leon Russell land for the last 2 years, reading very little for pleasure. New Yorkers stacked up in the magazine rack and books stacking up in shelves. And I figured I would just go into fiction to start reading fiction right out of this, and certainly not into music stuff again. But this just seemed really compelling, and it's been really interesting to read it. I'm almost finished with it. He's a poet by trade, I think, mainly. So it's got I like music books like that. It's not just exclusively music. It's about all of Black performance in America and what that means. And it's not a huge long tome. It's a concise and very poetically written book, and very personal, heavy on the point of view. As far as music, I'm a bit all over the place. I mean, I for the last few years, I keep coming back to like the new artists that have risen to the surface for me and stuck, let's say, because I put a ton of new stuff, put a ton of new stuff on playlists, and then forget that I love that band or that song. But what I keep coming back to and listening to from front to back are Big Thief albums, and I just think Adrienne Lenker is one of the great writers. Period. I just think she's an amazing songwriter, and I find everything that they put out again engrossing and compelling. And I just think that they're going to go down, from at least for people like me, as one of the great bands. I mean, Phoebe Bridgers is up there for me as well, and but not quite to bringing me back like Big Thief, which has a bit more rock and roll edge to it. And I'm always getting, my daughter's 22 and she's wide open, and I send her stuff, she sends me stuff. So I'm always listening to stuff there. But I mean, my thing is really going back to old stuff, especially old stuff that I missed, I'm just like looking at what I've been playing lately. And it's like, a Jimmy Heath record, or, old jazz and soul records that I might not have known about. And, I mean, and working on Leon Russell, he had such wide-ranging tentacles because he was a session guy for almost the entire 1960s, from 61 to 68, 69. So that turned me on to a lot of great music that I might not have really delved deep into. Like, I mean, one of my favorite periods of music, and I'm not alone in this, is that sort of 68 to 72, where you've got Delaney and Bonnie, and their influence on like people like Clapton and Harrison, George Harrison, and the Mad Dogs and Englishmen scene, and how that sort of exploded out into the early 70s. But specifically that R&B gospel meets rock and roll thing that really kind of begat All Things Must Pass, and Delaney and Bonnie alone, their records are amazing. But Exile on Main Street and of course Sticky Fingers, that kind of scene, which was also around the time when Aretha Franklin was doing her Amazing Grace record. So I have this thing for the gospel influence on rock and roll in particular. When we were young, my wife and I, we were married. Probably it was early days of our marriage in the 90s. We drove down and took a road trip to Nashville and Memphis, and we went and made a pilgrimage to Reverend Al Green's church. And I thought it would be a bit touristy maybe, or it would just be awkward or something, but it was the most welcoming, authentic thing that I'd been to. I mean, there were a couple of other tourists, I guess, but for the most part, it was an actual smallish congregation, and the music was incredible. And it went on for like 2 hours before I think we had to go catch a plane or something. We were like, I got to leave. But I mean, if this was church, I would be in church every Sunday. I don't care if it was Catholic or a synagogue or what, because the music, I mean, as a couple of people I talked to for the Leon book said, Leon felt like, he was a spiritual guy. People think that he grew up in the church, but for him, it wasn't. He grew up in like Protestant church. For him, music was God. And I think a lot of musicians feel the same way. It's like, that's how I commune with anything beyond myself, is through music. That's when I feel most quote unquote holy. Like I'm in touch with something other than just this sort of material world.
And that's it for today's episode. You can buy my book, Live Through that features other artists from the 90s wherever you buy your books. Or you can get 15% off the book by using the promo code PODCAST15 by ordering at the link on the podcast page. Bill also wrote about this incident on The Observer, and you can still find it out there on the web. I've included a link to the story in the show notes. And if you like this show, please subscribe so you'll know when the latest episode comes out. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Mike Hipple Photo, all one word. Thanks for listening.